Well, greetings. Welcome. A ScreenFlow video. Not sure how long it's going to go. I'm going to try to be brief, but it's a subject that's very important to me. Started a conversation last evening concerning, well, what some people call the ecclesiastical text position. I had first encountered this position and interacted with one of its advocates back in the 1990s, mid-1990s. Theodore Letus was his name, the late Theodore Letus. Some of that extensive interaction is still available, lurking in some archive someplace. This was back in the days of BBSs and things like that, before the internet really got rolling big time. But in any case, I really have serious problems with the ecclesiastical text position. And what I mean by that is I truly believe that it is the end of meaningful Christian apologetic interaction and defense. I find it to be thoroughly inconsistent with Reformed presuppositions, even though it's mainly the children of the Reformation that hold to it. It seems to really share certain assumptions that are, I find, completely inconsistent with what we believe about sola scriptura and things like that. Now, I tried to begin some discussion with this on Facebook last evening. The problem was that I was getting stuff sent to me from within forums I don't have access to, and there were like 2 or 3 threads where things were being posted, and it just became impossible to even try to keep up with stuff. It's very confusing and would take a tremendous amount of effort, and so I pretty much gave up on anything. I feel like giving up on any meaningful interaction in social media, to be perfectly honest with you. It doesn't work very well. But the reason being is that I was provided with a statement from, again, within a forum that I'm not a part of, that I found extremely offensive, a low blow, below the belt, just really amazing that this would come from a fellow Reformed Baptist elder. I was, I guess I shouldn't say shocked, but it was very disappointing. And it said, I just came across this in the James White message linked above. It is exceedingly painful. There is a reason why the Muslims want him to lecture in their mosque, but it isn't what James White thinks it is. Just take a look all over YouTube at how Muslim apologists are using James White's defense of the critical text. Now, it's very, very obvious that the writer of these words, again, you really think that the Muslims have invited me to do debates in mosques because of the critical text versus ecclesiastical text stuff? They don't even know what that is. You've got to be kidding me. And secondly, as most people know, people like Muslim by Choice, we have over and over again used that particular individual's ignorance of these issues as a mechanism for education to point out where it is that they completely misunderstand the issue. For example, Muslims believe that if we admit that there is any textual variation whatsoever, that we're admitting that our text is corrupt. Well, even an ecclesiastical text advocate has to admit that there are variants between all 5 editions of Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, that there are variants in the majority text platform, in the Byzantine text platform. So, I'm sorry, but a person who can make a statement like this just has obviously never engaged any meaningful Islamic apologists at all. And that's one of the problems with the ecclesiastical text position. It really seems to me that it just sort of only exists in the backwaters of Reformeddom. I've never met a person who's actually out there doing the work that's presenting this as a meaningful apologetic methodology for dealing with any other world religion or anything else. I just haven't. I find it amongst people that spend most of their time reading just Reform stuff, and they don't wander out of that safe little environment and do anything else with that. So the fact of the matter is that Muslims believe that any admission of any variation, say they don't know about the history of their own text. Vast majority of them don't, some do, but they don't know that their own text has a history, that it has textual variation within it. They very rarely know anything about the specifics of this Anna manuscripts or Fogg's palimpsest manuscript or any of those types of things. And so, sure, there are lots of YouTube videos out there of people who are grossly ignorant of the subject going, see, they admit corruption, when all we're talking about is textual variation. Not the corruption of the text, not the loss of the text. And so we have produced a number of videos correcting those misapprehensions. So what are we supposed to do? What is the ecclesiastical text response to this? Because remember, when we listen to what the Muslims want the New Testament to look like, what they want to look like is their controlled transmission, traditional text view. Well, there is a parallel there. And in fact, if you listen to the debates I've done in London and down in Potchefstroom, more than one in London, where the Muslim there presented pretty much the Muslim version of an ecclesiastical text view. We've got Uthman's revision. As long as we've got that, that's all we need because that's what God has preserved. Well, that's a theological conclusion, not a historical conclusion. There's a lot of reasons to question that. And yet, how would an ecclesiastical text advocate respond to that by saying, oh, no, that's not the text God preserved. This is the text God preserved. And neither one of them can actually muster any meaningful historical argument for that, because if the ecclesiastical text position is that, well, this is the text that God preserved, and he didn't preserve all these other texts even though we possess them today. Well, the Muslim says, this is the text God preserved. And it doesn't matter what those palimpsests over there say. It doesn't matter what that over there say. It doesn't matter what the earlier manuscripts say. This is what has been preserved. You've got two equal positions, no means whatsoever of accomplishing anything in that conversation at all, because there's no historical information that can be brought to bear that would be relevant. So are we just supposed to not admit the existence of textual variation? Are we supposed to do what many Muslims do and say, oh, no, there's what we have today is absolutely exactly what was given to Muhammad? That's what they say. Are we supposed to say the same thing? Oh, no, what we have today in the TR or whatever the ET is. I've never seen the official ET. We'll talk a little more about that in a moment. This is what's been providentially preserved, even though we can't, really be specific in lots of places. But, it's the general thing that matters. It's the vibe of the thing for those of you in Australia. So it just very much concerns me that just as Rome was emphasizing the traditional Latin text, and said, well, this is the text God's preserved. This is the church. God has given the church this text. Are we supposed to embrace the idea that, well, Rome was wrong about that, but it was just wrong about which text it was? I see a subjugation of the inspired text to an ecclesiastical authority. Now, I want to ask my Reformed ET proponents, when did the church make this decision? Which council was it? Who is involved? What manuscripts were examined? What textual variants were examined? When the church met to decide these things, did they have access to everything that we have access today? Did they know the difference between the Byzantine text platform and the Western text and the Alexandrian text? And And did they have good representations of each one? And did they think through the historical realities of, well, the Islamic expansion going across North Africa and the impact that had upon the church in those places, and the switching over to Latin in the Western church starting in the very end of the 2nd century, and the fact that you have the majority of texts being produced around Byzantium, and that there's a historical reality for that. Did they take all of that into consideration? Where are their deliberations? Which council was that? Who was involved? I've never gotten answers to any of these things. It's just, well, it's the general usage, you see. It's what was used by the Westminster Divines, or it was what was used by the framers of the London Baptist Confession of Faith. Well, God bless every single one of them, but none of them were infallible. Not a single one. And the text they used, well, we all know Calvin adopted a number of readings, rejected a number of TR readings, even introduced some emendations himself, which may be why Beza introduced the emendation of Revelation 16:5. But they didn't seem to have this view of an ecclesiastical text that, well, this has always been used, and so this is the text that's been preserved, et cetera, et cetera. They didn't seem to have that idea. And so maybe later generations came up with that, but I don't believe in the infallibility of Reformed scholasticism. And I hope nobody else does either. I believe in sola scriptura, and I believe in semper reformanda, and I am quite honestly concerned that there are some people who don't seem to recognize that some of our forefathers didn't have all the information that we have today. And if new information comes to light, are we just supposed to, oh, no, can't, that'd be compromised, can't look at that. That very, very much concerns me. And as a result, I said this back in the 90s, it's been 20 years now I've been saying the same thing. And that is the ecclesiastical text position. As theoretically wonderful as it may sound in an online chat room, or in the old BBS forums, it cannot answer direct questions about specific readings. Now it's interesting. This particular writer had specifically said that the ecclesiastical text position does not produce the text; it receives the text. Well, that's right. Again, that sounds wonderful, but it answers no questions. Let me just demonstrate how it's empty rhetoric to make that statement. What text did the church, the ecclesia, receive at Revelation 16:5? There's no question that at least up till 1598, we know what Revelation 16:5 read in all the Greek manuscripts. So, as long as there was a church before then what had been received is what is in the modern eclectic text, not in the Textus Receptus. So there has to be an admission that the TR has to be able to be amended. But what's the basis for the amending? Is it the Byzantine text platform? See, once you start doing this, you've got to engage in textual criticism. Where has the church ever done this? Where has the church said, we'll use these principles, these the manuscripts? Where has the church done that? A church that has authority over me. Where has this happened? I'm asking Reformed people to answer this question. Where has that happened? It hasn't happened. You and I both know that. So, how about Luke 2:22? That's the one that I asked Douglas Wilson about. I'm sorry, I did not get a meaningful answer as to how you determine what the reading of where you have specific variants. How about where you have splits in the Byzantine manuscript tradition, where you have a near split as far as numbers in the majority text tradition? What do you do then? You have to have textual critical principles. If you just have theories about the church, you can't answer questions. That's why it's apologetically vacuous. Ephesians 1:18, Ephesians 3:9, 2 Timothy 2:19. These are all places where the TR reading is basically indefensible. Is that the ecclesiastical text reading? What is the ecclesiastical text? How do you determine it? I ask the question because just assuming its existence is very much insufficient. Some people have counted as many as 1,800 differences between the TR and the majority text. How do you determine what's the original? These are questions that need to be answered, and I don't think that they're there. Few people have pointed out that, for example, in the verse citation materials in our confessions, texts like 1 John 5:7 are cited, and they are. That was the default text of the day. There were plenty of people then that knew it was a later edition, but there were others that did not. So what are we supposed to do? Here is where I honestly have to draw a line, because if you defend the comma, you have no basis whatsoever for assuring anybody with a straight face that we continue to have the original readings of the New Testament. You just don't. If an entire vitally important, theologically relevant text can completely disappear from the Greek manuscript tradition, then there's no reason to believe we continue to have the original readings. And when I encounter someone who will go to the mat in defense of the comma, then I know I'm dealing with a zealot that's just going to be holding to views that will be detrimental to anyone who's trying to defend the faith in the context that we're called to minister today, and that is an extremely anti-Christian culture that is soaked with the false information and the anti-biblical presuppositions of the Bart Ehrmans of the world. Then, last thing here, in one last comment that I pulled from Facebook, I began seeing a very troubling merging of, by this same writer, of canon issues with text issues. And of course, canon and text are very related to one another, but to confuse the two, as this author's doing, again leads us straight back to the arguments of Rome, and ironically of the more conservative forms of Islam. That does not make the arguments wrong. It just means you need to recognize that's what you're dealing with, and that's what you're presenting. The lines were, I read earlier. The ecclesiastical text position does not produce the text; it receives the text. It does so on the grounds that this is the text that was handed down through history by the providence of God. Well, the reality is the text that has been handed down through history by the providence of God is not just a narrow spectrum of the Byzantine manuscript tradition. Was the providence of God not involved in the preservation of the papyri? Is P72, P66, P75, P45, those are not part of the providence of God? There's just so much packed into these words that a lot of people don't think through. Then I was asked two questions, and this is where it gets very concerning to me. Upon what basis do you have any confidence that 1, 3 John is canonical, seeing as it was not mentioned until the middle of the 3rd century and was debated up until the 5th? Number 2, upon what basis do you accept that the Pentateuch, as we now have it, looks anything like the original work of Moses? Now, when you jump from manuscripts of the New Testament to dealing, 1, with canon issues and 2, with Old Testament textual issues, seems like an abandonment of the actual subject, but it likewise introduces connections and confusions that really worry me, because if I didn't know who this came from, it sounds like it comes from Catholic Answers. Because it's the Romanists who say, well, we can help you solve all these problems because the church determines both the extent of Scripture, canon, and the content and meaning of Scripture, as well as the extent of tradition and the meaning of tradition, which is why I keep saying Rome believes in sola ecclesia. So, are we supposed to, what follows from this, from the first question? That 3 John is canonical because it's found in a particular number of Byzantine manuscripts? Or is it canonical because Carthage and Hippo said so? Now we're going to have to start dealing with all of the same issues that I raise all the time for Roman Catholics on this, the differences in the canons provided by Carthage and Hippo, and then Trent seems to have a different understanding, and then you got the issues of the Apocrypha, and all the rest of this stuff comes up. But that's not normally what I'm dealing with my fellow Reformed brethren, but seems to be so here. Now, I believe that God expended the exact same amount of effort to preserve his word and to make his word known as he did in inspiring it. There isn't a question here about the preservation of Scripture. The question is methodology and result. And the great gift that has been given to the Christian church is the entire breadth of the New Testament manuscript tradition, which makes it possible for us to, without blinking, without sacrificing our minds, without dissembling, to look at somebody in the eye and say, it is impossible. I can look at a Muslim and say, it is impossible for the kind of corruption you claim has taken place in the text of the New Testament to have ever taken place. It is impossible for that to have happened. And I don't have to say, and it's just because I accept this group of manuscripts. Because of the immediate, as I've called it, multifocality, multiple authors, multiple times, multiple audiences, there was never anybody to control the text of the New Testament. It explodes across the known world at that time. Even though Rome tries to destroy it, still it is the most widely, earliest, and best attested work of all of antiquity. I'm talking about the New Testament here. How the Old Testament was passed on, we'll talk about in a moment. That is our strength. And it's sacrificed by the ET position. It's gone. That's what really, really, really concerns me. So, what's the ET answer to this question? I mean, any book in the New Testament is canonical because it's theopneustos, not because of how many manuscripts it appears in. It's not a counting noses thing. And how do we know the text of 3 John? What's the methodology? I don't know what the ET claim being made here is. And then the Pentateuch? Well, that's a completely different subject, isn't it? Maybe you think otherwise. Maybe you think, no, because the Scripture is produced by the church. Well, again, I hope you don't take this into a debate with the Roman Catholic, because you're toast. I don't even know what to say at that point. I mean, you're both just going to be saying, well, no, my ultimate authority says this. Well, my ultimate authority says that. Well, let's all go home, because we're not going to be able to decide any of this, because we both actually do the same thing, just based upon different ultimate authorities. We can talk about the lines of transmission that lead to the Hebrew Masoretic text, the Aramaic Targums, the Greek Septuagint, and it's a completely different world in talking about Old Testament text transmission, because you're talking about such a much more older text that is produced over such a much longer period of time in different languages, and it's not meant to be distributed around the world until it's already 1,000 years old. So it's completely different as to the methodology of its transmission over time. But I'm really concerned when I hear a Reformed person possibly, I hope I'm wrong here, but possibly suggesting that the reason we know what the Pentateuch is because the church says so. When, does the church hear the voice of Christ in Scripture or determine what the voice of Christ in Scripture will be? Just makes me wonder exactly where this ecclesiastical text stuff goes. It really does. It's very concerning to me. So I wanted to make some comments on this, and I've invited this writer to substantiate what he said in his first statement, and we can discuss these other issues. On the dividing line, I'm going to be gone all of next week, but I'll be here all of August, and we can set something up, and we can, just a phone call in, or Skype, or Google Hangout, or whatever works best. Because, if you really think that the reason that Muslims are engaging me in debate is because we're getting all this, he's on our side. Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. Think you missed something there. But there's other things to be discussed as well, and I'd like to know, what is the objective methodology that the ecclesiastical text position presents to answer the questions concerning variant readings in just some of those texts that I cited? I think that's an important thing to ask. So there you go. There's some of the issues that we need to address regarding the ecclesiastical text materials. I hope this has been useful to you, and thanks for watching.